a chance to ask questions.
Yeah, I've just started the YouTube stream, so we're good to go.
Great, thank you. So a proper good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us for the 2nd October meeting of the Climate Change, Environment and Growth EAP. As I said, a lot to get through, lots of interesting bits today, as ever. So the first item is apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Jenny Byrne.
Thank you. Second item is members' declarations of interest. Does anybody need to declare anything? No, shakes of heads, so that's good. Then we've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of October. Has everybody had a chance to read through and is happy with those? I see nods of heads, so that's good. And now moving on to the first substantive item, which is a progress report and presentation from NN2 Net Zero by Electric Corby. So I will hand over to Nick and Peter to take us through that.
You're on mute, Nick.
That's a good start. You missed me mumbling about getting technology working, and I clearly failed at first hurdle. So, let me get the slides to show. There we go. If I get screen and gets to the. Are you seeing a full screen or not at this point?
Not a full screen. It's quite small.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Great, thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody. As the chair confirmed, we've been putting together the North Northampton Net Zero program over the last 7 or 8 months now, really, as part of the Community Renewal Fund that the government issued last year. We put forward a project to pull together a program of strategic initiatives and actions that could help the area achieve net zero before 2050, and looking at what options and how far before 2050 it could be achieved, assuming it could be achieved at all. As Electric Places, as we now are, formerly Electric Corby CIC, we've been doing that program of work. We're now at a stage where we've been looking at the whole area. By the way, this isn't just looking at the authority's own emissions. The council is doing its sterling work of its own on its own position, but this is looking at the whole cross-sector initiatives to try and achieve net zero. We've been looking at developing that program of initiatives. We've now got to a sort of draft options stage for a review with stakeholders, and this discussion is part of that. So we're going to sort of set out a little agenda here, quite a bit to get through, as Chair confirmed. So I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Peter in a moment, who's been doing a lot of the detailed work on the initiatives as well. And I'll join in at certain points during the conversation, and then talk about how we're going to take this forward from this point for the balance of the programme. So at this stage, I was going to hand over to Peter. Are you good to go, Peter?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So basically the project came out of the climate change and climate emergency and trying to declaring that we should reach net zero by 2050. How do we do that? How do we do that in North Northamptonshire? So the first thing was to look at what the current situation was. So that chart shows the current CO2 emissions by sector. And it shows that actually in the last 15 years, we've been getting slightly better, which is good. Obviously not good enough to get to net zero. So what are the set of initiatives that we need to put in place or should put in place to get to net zero? And that's what this project is hoping to identified, along with a framework for assessing new ones as they come along, and ideas for how to progress. Next one. So this chart shows the national grid's future energy scenarios steady state progression forecast for our area, which is basically, if we carry on kind of gradually improving as we are now, this is where we'd end up at 2050, which is not net zero, which is no surprise. And what we're trying to do is to close the gap based on today's position, which is about 1900. So because that's a forecast, and what we're trying to do is to get from today's position through to zero. So we've looked at 8,000, well, more than 8,000 projects, lots and lots of Innovate UK projects, EU Horizon projects, behaviour initiatives, lots and lots of different sorts of things, to try and work out which is the best group of them to move forward. So the next slide. And as part of that, we've also called for new ideas. So we set up a website, we've held events, we've talked at lots of different events, we've done 3 different knowledge transfer network calls for to identify any new ideas that might help us. And we've had loads of good feedback actually. And we've engaged with lots of interesting organisations with good ideas for how to get to net zero. No ideas about ideas. So it's not necessarily just high tech, but it's also really basic things that we could do, and the scales, any scale too. So what if every roof had solar on it, or every car park had solar and wind on it, or if everyone converted to air source heat pumps, gave up their cars, no one drove to work, everyone became vegetarian. So all those sorts of things are on the table. So and worthy of kind of full assessment as part of the project. And on the back of that, so in terms of individuals, so there's also, what's important to say is that it's not just us. So there are loads of people, looking at this issue, and obviously our duty is just to kind of look to see what best practice is and what other people are saying. And this is a really exceptional piece of work that Ivanova did for Leeds, where her team looked at 15,000 projects across Europe, initiatives, and then kind of benchmark them. So in terms of each particular action, if you did that, what would that mean in terms of the carbon reduction? And this slide is just the top 10 from that list. And there are no big surprises here. It's kind of, I guess, what we think. So if everyone gave up their cars and lived carbon free, that's the number one biggest thing that an individual could do. Or failing that, if they moved to an electric vehicle and the electricity was clean, that's kind of the number 2, because transport just emits a massive amount of emissions. And flying, so even though people don't fly very much, flying is massive too. And moving down the list, it's kind of moving to public transport, refurbishing and renovating buildings rather than building new buildings. So construction is a massive source, and diet, so food, farming, forestry, that's important too. So that's the kind of top 10 list that people can do to help. So what we did next, so we basically sort of assessed all these ideas and came up with a list, with a big spreadsheet. And what we're trying to do is to put it into context for Northamptonshire. So there are a number of really good ideas. So solar on every roof, giving up your vehicle, switching to electric vehicles. Well, what does that actually mean for Northamptonshire? So what we've tried to do here is to say, well, so what is the local situation? How many cars are there? How many households are there? What's reasonable to assume in terms of how many of those would actually make these switches? And what this is a draft gap close scenario. So if these number of people did these number of things, then we'd get to net zero. So it's our kind of starting point of, and I guess it's our best guess at the types of initiatives that people need to do and the numbers of people that need to make those changes. So it was really quite encouraging that we could work out how to get to net zero, but obviously this is just in an early stage of the process. And what we needed to do next was to kind of identify, well, just how realistic are these things? So how realistic that 60% of people put solar on their roof, that 20% of people turn vegetarian up from 11%, that, you know, that I can't, it's so small, I can't read, but those sorts of initiatives really happen. So next was to do a bunch of feasibility studies. How feasible is it? So, and the first thing was to look at, Nick, if you could go to the next one.
Should be on the next one now.
Oh, maybe there's a lag on it.
Is everybody seeing feasibility studies slides? Yes. Great.
Yeah. So we're carrying out, because this is still ongoing, a bunch of feasibility studies, and the first one was engaging with some really top academics from likes of Cranfield University to validate the data. So to triangulate it, take it from more than one source. I mean, some of the data is from like 2011 census, 2021 census data's not come through, so that needed updating with better data, like that, but some's really bang up to date, so Bayes is pretty good. So validating those data sources to make sure there weren't any funny numbers. And then the other thing was to looking at actually the topography of the regions. How realistic is it to put lots of wind, lots of solar, and then looking at it, it's not, even if you did that, if you couldn't use the energy there and then, it would be wasted. So we needed to look about the feasibility of large-scale energy storage schemes, or the ability to share energy as it's generated efficiently through local grids, and local microgrids, and community schemes. And we also looked at things like e-fuels. So for those vehicles like trucks, heavy goods vehicles, which generate a lot more emissions than a car because they're so much bigger, and it's much harder to electrify them. What's the feasibility of some of the other solutions for those? So there are a number of different feasibility studies that we're kind of in the process of doing to kind of sense check some of the ideas that we've proposed.
Yeah, and with one of those, we've been looking at developing a digital twin. Really, as part of the program, not a complete and 100% digital twin at this stage, but during the program, we've been developing this sort of dynamic 3D model that allow us to test the impact of different initiatives in real time and see. So that there's a massive of data and spreadsheets behind looking at how we can in real time see the information and the demographics impact as they change over time. And it's really the idea. It's also a planner a visual aid that planners could use. Anybody looking at the net zero strategy could start to use and see what the impacts could be. It's also a tool for sort of future stewardship and progress review, so we can see when we've input the latest data what impact that's really having and how that looks forward as well, so we can see what the area looks like at certain points on the roadmap towards net zero in 2040 or 2050 when we achieve it. It is just a pilot as part of this program for Northamptonshire. It's not, at the end it will have some fairly useful inputs, but it won't be 100% complete during this program. It's something that we hope is a tool that we can pick up and use ongoing. I've got a very quick demo of the 3D visual side of it, so forgive me if hopefully the technology works at this point and we get a little short video, and the sound is a bit loud, so if I turn that off. I don't know if that music was very loud in the background. I'll turn that down. So this is really showing a heat map of proximity to public car parks. So for example, if you're looking at It seems to be stuck. Yeah, it's stuck. Hang on, I've got it stuck. So
It's okay.
yeah, I'll get it stopped.
Do you want me to?
All right, I'll hopefully stop it now. Give me 2 seconds. I'll just reboot that and get that working again. Apologies for that, but always a slight danger when you go to videos whether they're going to work. And on this occasion, it's let me down. So I'll go back and we'll skip that video. But really, that was just a 3D rendering that was trying to show the proximity to car parks. So you could see those people that were, for example, don't have off-street parking, how close they would be to a public car park or a communal area that might enable them to charge on a public charge point.
It's not gone back to the presentation for me.
No, I'm just talking while I'm just talking what it was showing while I get it back up, which should be any second now, hopefully. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, and I'll skip forward to where we were. Apologies for that, folks. So if I move us on to digital twin, yeah. So I think that was evidently work in progress, and but there is it's helping us identify the sort of hotspot areas, for example, on EV strategy and EV charge points. So just moving on past that quickly before it freezes again, I was going to come back to you, Peter, and back on strategic options.
So just that digital twin is really brilliant. So it's not just EV charging, but also we could like heat map the number of buildings got different EPC ratings. So the number of really, really poorly insulated as opposed to really well insulated, and lots of other. We're going to use various dials for the different strategies that we could do to see what their impact would be on the region. But in terms of
that data is in the model now already in terms of EPCs, for example.
So, but in terms of the big strategic options, so I guess there are a few options. What if we just went for it, held to leather, led the way, did everything, as fast as we could, and we think that if we did that, we could potentially reach net zero by 2032, but it would cost an absolute fortune, and there would be a lot of risk attached to it. So a second option would be to take a more focused approach and just pick out the big hitters, so the initiatives that we think would have the biggest impacts, and focus on those. And we think that if we did that, that would be almost as quick, still cost a lot, and still have a bunch of risk attached to it. So one other option would be to go with the lowest cost approach, which would be to look at, say, some of the less costly initiatives like behaviour change, rather than carpeting places with electric vehicle charge points and solar and wind, the technology ones, but more behaviour ones, and trying to get people to change their behaviours. And although that may well be the most cost effective, that's probably one of the riskiest, because it's hard to know how effective we will be in convincing people to change their behaviours. So what we're suggesting is a sort of risk adjusted, low cost approach, where we try and do the things that have the most impact, but the least risk of failure. So and the approach for that is this kind of funnel approach. So at the start and now, there are tons of different initiatives and lots of different new technology and new research coming along, and lots of great ideas about how to reach net zero, and what we might do. And I guess it's hard to know, it's hard to predict which are going to be the winners and which are going to be the losers. So this is kind of saying, so long as it broadly looks like it's going to be helpful, it should be part of the mix and encouraged. And maybe we seed the things and take a sort of balanced portfolio approach of seeding the initiatives which we think have the most potential for our area, but it's a bit more like a watch and brief. And then over time, the worst ones will kind of fall away and the better ones will emerge, and that will enable us to focus more cost effectively on the initiatives with the greatest chance of success. So that's the sort of approach that we're recommending, and again taking a sort of rag rating approach. So as new initiatives, new tech emerges, as it's doing, then we rag rate them. Is it going to be helpful? Green, it's in. Not sure, we'll watch it. Or red, no, it's going to be counterproductive. We shouldn't follow that. And I guess trying to think of an example. Examples, what I mean is, I suppose if you look at batteries, and there are loads of a lot of research about different chemistries. You know, what's better than lithium? And lithium moved on from lead acid, and also different sorts of chemistries, and loads of stuff going on. And over time, you know, there might be different chemistries that merge as being the best approach. Or another example would be kind of, if you remember, VHS versus Betamax. So it wasn't really clear which is going to work, but Betamax lost and VHS became successful. So a risk-adjusted portfolio approach is we think the best way to go.
So we're going to move on now to look at the various areas where we think the initiatives that we've been reviewing fall under, whether it's buildings, energy, transport, and so on, and give you a bit of a look at how each of those areas, some of the initiatives and some of the programs that we're thinking can come forward. So first one there, Peter, I think it's domestic buildings. Did you want to talk about this table?
So I can do, or so
really just explaining the structure of the table.
Yeah, sure. So so what we did, so in terms of our draft gap close spreadsheet, we've developed that, and we've kind of so looked at those initiatives that we think have the most potential, and forecast based on what we think would be a reasonable uptake for the region, what the impact would be at 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040. So that's the tons of CO2 saved, and what that means in terms of the kind of the benefit for that initiatives, but also what's the investment cost. And so the investment cost is vastly different for different initiatives. So for example, the first one here, so changing gas heating or to air source heat pumps, so switching from fossil fuels to clean is clearly going to have a massive impact, but each air source heat pump system costs on average 10 grand, or sorry, £10,000 for an average home. So the investment cost of doing that is massive. Whereas kind of insulation, so is also really effective because you're just losing less heat, you're keeping more heat in the home. But the cost of insulating a roof is around about 300, or even the cavity, cavity insulation walls about 600. So the cost is much more reasonable than it is for air source heat pumps. So this is kind of looking at the uptake, but also the cost of those different initiatives. And we've done that for each of the initiatives on the draft gap close list.
Yeah. And so then we've sort of looked at all of those sort of, if you like, strategic level initiatives, and what sort of actions might we take on the ground, and initiatives might we take forward to action those things. And a better buildings program really was the thing we were looking at here, picking up on Peter's point about insulation being a key option for people to both save money themselves, but obviously reduce their CO2, and a relatively cost-effective mechanism. Looking at control, how people actually monitor and control how they're using their energy. Visibility and knowledge helps people take actions and shift the behaviour change. And education programs to inform those decisions, both on the practical nature of them, but also the financial and economic benefits and options that they have. Looking at systems, switching, as we said, from fossil fuels to electric, and and developing a program that will again support people in terms of information and knowledge of what's available to make those transitions, and also in terms of generating electricity and heat on the buildings. So identifying community options for doing that. Part of our discussions have been with all of the parishes across the area as well, and various initiatives that they're keen to pursue in their own areas. So looking at where we can identify energy generation locally, and then looking at new buildings. Obviously, we're a significant growth area. There's a great deal of new housing and new development generally in the area, and looking at making sure we can support and inform planners, architects, developers in understanding what the options are, improve that net zero literacy across the sectors, and give solutions and updates. So we're looking at a CPD program. In fact, again, part of our engagement was to take part in a CPD program for planners around this topic. So, and then really ensuring strong, clear policy on embodied and operational net zero targets, what they mean. I'll come back to those in the presentations. Importantly, looking at this in a holistic view, obviously individual buildings are important, but there's a great deal of strategic development going on. How will the different elements of change come together to ensure we've got that assessment of how a development works as in net zero terms, as opposed to just the individual buildings. Moving on to transport, Peter.
So for transport, so looking at this table, so the first one, I suppose, is probably the hardest one. So it takes 200 watts to move 1 ton, 1 mile. It's kind of simple physics. So a 1 ton car is opposed to a 38-ton truck. A 38-ton truck just burns 38 times, masses more fuel than a car. So switching every car to electric is really great, but the elephant in the room is kind of what you do with trucks. And trucks are much harder because the power to weight ratio of putting lots of batteries in weighs a lot themselves. So that's kind of hard. So we're looking at alternatives. And of course, there's hydrogen, but then you've got to change, the whole infrastructure. Every truck needs to be changed, all the tanks and all the risks. So there are other alternatives like e-fuels that we're looking at. So where you use the existing infrastructure, where you're just making diesel, as it were, in a clean way. So rather than using fossil fuel, you're using green hydrogen, and the hydrocarbon, the carbon from it is from waste, so from renewed waste. So the potential of those for the really heavy, difficult vehicles like trucks might be significant and might actually be much more cost effective than hydrogen infrastructure. But the other ones we're looking at is electric vehicles, and it's not, and I suppose here, so okay.
Sorry, Peter.
That's okay. So
should I go back? I'll go back. There you go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
maybe just a little bit. So for electric vehicles, so what we've sort of said is that there's the government program around banning ICE vehicles by 2030. So that's obviously really helpful. And there are two things here. One, there's a cost premium. So electric cars, and we're sort of saying, cost on average £10,000 more than a normal vehicle. So there's a big investment cost for people to move, but also there is kind of an infrastructure cost, which needs to bear into account, which is what sort of electric vehicle charge points do you need to put in place, and how many do you need to put in place, and what's the cost of doing that. So there's some costs around switching to electric, and the other sorts of things, modal shifts, so people giving up their cars, sharing cars, moving to cycling and public transport are other things we've kind of worked out what the cumulative benefits are. Apologies, yeah, that's enough of that side. So in terms of what we should do, well, the first thing is getting kind of the EV strategy in place and working out with perhaps Levi's support, where we should put infrastructure in for charging to support universal fair access to charging as people move to electric vehicles. And the second thing is to kind of lead by example, so council electrifying its fleet and encouraging people to make modal shifts, creating mobility hubs, introducing zero emission zones, and right-sizing public transport, publicising grants where they are available, and as I was harping on about, sort of trialling e-fuels would be good too. The charts at the bottom is just fresh out some analysis we've been doing with Cenex for our area, which is based on the electric vehicle forecasting that they've done. These are the number of charge points. We'd need to put public charge points on street. So this is taking into account the number of people who have off-street parking through, drives, that we need to put across the area by different points. So 25, 30, 35, 40. So there's quite a lot to do in this area. And also the knock-on impact of that is a lot more energy is required for electricity to put into those vehicles.
Yeah.
So what that means in terms of a potential draft program is by 2025, we need to install around about 615 standard charge points and 45 rapids, rising up through to around about 2,617 by 2040. That's to meet the uptake that, and the ideal is, I suppose, that by 2030, the estimate is 20% of people will have cars, further 20% will have hybrids, another 20% hopefully will switch to smaller vehicles. And then by 2040, as people refresh their vehicles, more and more people will be in electric. But as well as public charge points, we think it's a good idea to investigate community-led things. So car club trials, mobility hubs, encouraging people to share and to keep their cars, those who keep their cars to share them, and encouraging people themselves to change their behaviours. 20% of households no longer have vehicles. If that doubled maybe by 2030, so 40% of people no longer have vehicles, and lots of people are using schemes like Zip Cars, and younger people now are kind of moving to that kind of on-demand model. And then lastly at the bottom, with the public sector, so electrifying the fleet, creating urban zero emission zones would be really good, and linking
just as a sorry, Peter.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Just the column on the right hand side of NNC role, we're doing an initial look at this, and there's a chart later on in the presentation which sort of brings this together as an initial look at what the role might be for NNC in each of these, and for the council in each of these areas. So there's just an indication here at this early draft stage for discussion. Moving on to industrial and commercial. Again, Peter, do you want to pick up a few highlights and then I can talk about the initiatives?
Sure. So the initiatives here is around sort of recycling, upcycling and sharing, better use of waste, and industry and commerce kind of improving their industrial processes to be more efficient and kind of designing out plastics, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So really, again, looking at a program that we think can be practical on the ground in Northamptonshire. Obviously, lots of the larger industries, they, for example, have to, by law, take part in a program called ESOS, which is looking at energy savings opportunities surveys, which flag up things that they can and should be doing to transition towards a lower carbon net zero route. But that doesn't apply to the vast majority of businesses in the area, which are SMEs. So we're looking at whether there's a program to not necessarily legislate, but certainly support and identify a light version of that can help businesses measure, manage and mitigate their carbon emissions within their buildings and their processes, and really flagging up, obviously, the opportunities that represent in terms of reduced costs, greater efficiencies and streamlining, as well as clearly some upfront investment costs that might be involved. But a program that helps inform and support businesses in doing that. As part of that program, perhaps looking at scopes 1, 2 and 3, which is essentially the emissions that they produce as a result of doing their business, of the purchases that they make, and then scope 3 is about their supply chain. And actually for most businesses, that's the majority of their carbon footprint comes from their own supply chain. So how do they work with their supply chains to try and collectively reduce that carbon footprint? So it's an information program to try and identify and support businesses in making that transition. Leading the way really means what businesses can do to help the wider population transition as well. They're heavily responsible for a lot of waste, obviously, and the recycling opportunities and upcycling that can come from improvements in that supply chain. They're obviously a key part of the EV transition in that their staff and their logistics, they're a key point for fleet transitions, but also the charging networks that need to come on board. Most people now that are in EVs charge at home and at work, and public charge places are a top up for those that need it. So accelerating that transition in the workplace will help the wider network transition. And then again, an information and education program around providing businesses with that necessary information to sort of unlock the opportunities, but also starting to look at the upskilling that's necessary as we make this transition and the opportunities that come from a new net zero economy, making sure that the skills are in place amongst the workforce to aid that. Moving on to food farming and forestry. I'll just so the industry tends to call it LL or LULUCF, I call it in short, but essentially that is land use change industry is what's covered by this sector. Peter, do you want to pick up on this?
Sure. So the one at the top there is if you banned fossil fuel fertilizers, that would have a massive impact. But then if you're planting lots of trees, so planting all low-grade area of trees, roadsides of trees, giving them, so we worked out the amount of land that's taken by roadside in the area, and then if you planted those trees, and for example, there are some initiatives like Rocking Forest where tree planting. So, but I guess here we're looking at food, forestry, and farming. So, so food in terms of if people shifted their behaviours. So at the moment, only 1% of the population are vegan, but if that rose, that would be helpful. If there are 11% who are vegetarian, if that went up to 20%, so if people bought more and consume more vegetables, that has a better carbon footprint than livestock and all the stuff that goes around livestock. Or even if people gave up or reduced the amount of red meat they ate, that would be really helpful too. And then of course food miles, so buying local food, so encouraging farming and the food chain kind of to work in sync locally would be really helpful. So encouraging people to eat local, seasonal, organic food, all those things really add up. And so this is trying to calculate what that means. So what we're suggesting is like three programs really. A focus on food program. So you know, if you take someone like Jamie and what he's done for school lunches, you know, and you kind of emulate that across kind of every public sector canteen and encourage people to change their behaviour and eat more healthily, but also kind of more organically, that would be a really good program. The second one would be working with local farmers to encourage them to support that and support the refocusing the supply chain locally, and retailers too. And the last one, a kind of a lead the way program on forestry, which is just kind of planting more space, any space that can cope with it with trees and other kind of carbon offsetting measures. And that in time could, you know, lead to timber for construction. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm conscious of time, Peter. Sorry.
Yeah. So energy. So I guess the single most important thing is if people just bought green energy from the grid and just really kick them into greening the grid would be brilliant. But obviously there's some really huge lead times to green the grid, so that's not going to happen overnight. That's like a 20-year initiative. But there are other things that you could do and that we could encourage people to do closer to home, so just to be more efficient. So cooking, more efficient cooking, any heating, boiling the water you need. So those sorts of behaviour change initiatives collectively are really helpful. But then the big hitters are things like putting solar, moving to more sustainable renewable energy wherever we can locally would be really, really helpful. So there are lots of car parks in Northamptonshire, lots of logistics businesses. So if you covered those with solar carport canopies, as is now kind of just about economic to do so, and put small scale wind on top of them, that would be massive. So we've kind of measured those things, and some of those numbers are really big, but obviously the investment costs of them are really big too. So thinking about that, that's informed our kind of program. Just next slide, which is the public sector doesn't necessarily need to do all the heavy lifting, because some of it, the economics of it stack up as it is now, given the high cost of energy. So, and there are lots of private funds that are looking for green growth. And but what we're suggesting is the public sector leads the way. So there is a capital program that established, across its estate to put solar and replace boilers with clean boilers, and put solar on its car parks, to ease the path for others. So to change and update planning permission so it's easy to have more renewable energy in place, making a requirement for new buildings, making a requirement over time to retrofit old buildings would be really helpful. But then once you've done that, private sector, because a lot of it now is commercial, with the cost of solar dramatically reducing over time, then the private sector could do a lot of the heavy lifting. So then there's kind of a bit that's left that's not commercial, that I think that we need to encourage communities, so local community-led initiatives, to set up microgrids, to work together collectively to kind of make sure they're not left behind, and that they also can benefit from renewable energy and the lower costs of that. The last one is consumer behaviour change initiative, so educating people how to be more efficient and to save on bills too. So that translates into an idea for a roadmap, which, as I said, first of all, is kind of leading the way with a capital programme to update public estate, and to put solar and wind on car parks, to encourage the private sector, to champion the private sector through sort of planning, to enable them to put solar and wind across the private estate, to encourage, perhaps with the CIC community fund approach, community schemes. There are a number of really successful and really good community schemes that we could learn from. And the last thing is the behaviour change programs.
So thanks, Peter. I think what we're doing now, and this is very much a draft route map, bringing all those initiatives and some others together. And this is, as I say, being populated as we speak. There's a programme draws towards its conclusion in late November and early December, setting out all those initiatives. The red line indicates where we think we can get to as a target, which is in that sort of 2035, perhaps a little earlier, but 2035 to 40 period, and an initial look at who might lead, who might champion, who might enable, and where direct investment might come from to move these things forward. It's not complete, as you can see a few gaps in terms of those particular initiatives, but it gives an indication where things like strategic policy, the council has a lead role to play in other areas of private sector on food transition and farming, particularly, will have an important part to play. So this will develop over the coming weeks, and we can share it'll form a part of the final report. What has emerged is, as well as the sort of specific big themes around buildings and energy and transport and so on, is some cross-cutting themes, obvious things around alignment across public and private sector initiatives, making sure we don't have counterproductive efforts on both sides, policy and action alignment as well, and communications. I think a lot of the programs we've talked about are around education, behavioural change, information, understanding, because there's an awful lot of strong technologies that are well proven out there already, and things like solar have been around for decades. It's more about understanding how they can be implemented as opposed to the technology needing to be developed. So communication is a really important thing. Funding, Peter was touching on at the end there, obviously aligning existing spending around a net zero initiative, but the potential for growth and prosperity activity, really there is a new and emerging net zero economy that we can tap into, and I think we should ensure that we've got that funding aligned as well as emerging net zero specific initiatives, which things like Peter referenced LEVI, which is actually the low emissions vehicle initiative from government, which is a large program to support transition to EVs and alternatives. It's those sorts of programs which will come out very specifically. And then an important cross-cutting theme is really delivery and stewardship, how the ongoing program is going to be supported, managed, progress reviewed. Our ambition would be that the digital twin can play a role in supporting that ongoing stewardship and review as well. So, but there are challenges inevitably, and just achieving a fair transition is a key one that lots of people are alert to, ensuring there aren't left behind neighbourhoods in terms of either energy transition or particularly transition to EVs and lack of access to electric vehicles or the ability to charge them. Really, that alignment on commitment and purpose, I think, is always a challenge, when you'll be very, very alert to. What is net zero actually is a key thing amongst, when you get into the detail. What do we mean by that? And I'll touch on that in a moment. And some outdated thinking in certain areas that may act as a drag on initiatives, and I'll touch on that as well in a moment. Really, I mean, one of those is, Peter mentioned elephants, and back to elephants in the room. When we're looking at construction, for example, embodied carbon in everything that we're doing is an area that often gets missed. There's one definition of net zero, which is all about operational carbon and what we emit as we operate our lives. Actually, as we build things, we're emitting carbon in the construction process. And often that is a significant proportion. In fact, in development terms, embodied carbon amounts to around 40% of the carbon, and operational carbon is only around 4%. This is looking at specifically a large urban extension in the North Northants area and looking at its particular carbon footprint over its lifetime. But that's not the half of it. Literally, that's not quite the half of it, because there is another one, which is transport, and that accounts for 56% of the emissions on a new development. So there's a really important that we don't get hung up completely on the operational side of things, and we look at the implications of developments and the embodied carbon elements. Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. No, I haven't. Yes, I have. Jumping ahead. So, the other things we've got to look at is the scale and speed of the challenge. I think we shouldn't underestimate that we are going to run out of our carbon budget as a globe by 2030. And at the moment, the UK's done very well in its carbon budgeting. It's been ahead of its carbon budgets, or on target with its carbon budgets in budget 1, 2, and 3. But it's currently off track for budget 4 and 5, which means we're falling behind on our ability. And we've got less than 10 years if we're going to stand any chance of staying below the 1.5 target, or even potentially some saying that the 2-degree temperature rise target. So there's an awful lot to be done relatively quickly. And maintaining focus and momentum is an important part of that as well. There are lots of distractions out there along the way. Just thinking about, a lot of people, there's people out there saying, are EVs really the answer? I mean, they are not the answer, they are an important part of the answer. But there's a lot of debate around whether we should be transitioning as quickly as we are. And these things are potential distractions. Hydrogen is another big one. It absolutely has a role to play in the future, but there is a lot of distracting conversations about whether it's the answer for domestic heating, for example, or whether it's the answer for vehicles. And it's Probably not. The balance of evidence suggests that it's 20 years away at least, in terms of being a solution for transport at a broader level. And there's lots of challenges around the production of hydrogen at volume and scale. So I think it's important that we focus on what we know that can be done in the next few years to really transition and look at these technologies as something that can help in the future, and not let them distract us away from what needs to be done. The other is, is this really necessary? And we should acknowledge that there are voices out there still thinking, is this really necessary? And that will present headwinds for the transition, and particularly around behavioural change, that we should be alert to. But there are some positives, and I think I wanted to sort of, as we draw to an end in this, is talk about the fact that there are economic, health and social benefits in this transition, not just the need to do the right thing. New job opportunities for businesses, lower energy bills, healthier local environments in terms of local emissions, broadly a healthier environment, more community engagement, people working together to share and resolve issues. Energy resilience is obviously top on people's agendas at the moment, and that transitioning and looking at the sorts of initiatives Peter was talking about presents greater opportunities for that community resilience. And better transport options. We can reduce cost of transport with greater modal opportunities for using shared vehicles and other forms of active transport. So a lot to be gained. And this is just an extract from one of the reports that we'll be highlighting more in the final reports that the LGA were looking at, for example, in terms of some of the economic benefits in jobs growth. So just to try and bring this back together, we've obviously done a baseline look at what the gap is. We've done a sort of fine filter and feasibility check on a vast array of projects that are out there. We've started to look at the different major sector areas that initiatives can happen, and the sorts of interventions around technology, infrastructure and behaviour being the key groups. Activity leads, public and private sector, obviously community. I would go another level down, which we didn't put on here, which is people, individuals. So there's a community activity, and then there's individual behaviour. And then there's that coordination around funding. How do we leverage in the best possible way the available funding, and that coordination around supporting delivery and progress review. Just on that last point, really, we're looking at we've been looking at strategic options and the broader initiatives. Obviously, we need to get on with this, and we're looking at those year one actions are going to be, and we need to think about how that's actually going to start to happen. 2023, we've got a carbon budget running through to 27, and then 2032. Every year counts now. So what our action is going to be next year, that's something we will be discussing with stakeholders in the coming months. Progress and review, again, I've mentioned that already, and funding. Really, how are we going to start to draw together that and put together a net zero action budget to really progress these initiatives? So in summary, we've done the baselining, we've got the projects and initiatives, we're looking at those options, we're steering towards and recommending that risk-adjusted approach that will get us in a pretty ambitious timescale into net zero, and we're setting out that sort of route match, and it's nearing completion. And this feedback session and this discussion is an important part of that. Next steps, we're in the middle of stakeholder engagement, an options review, and we're looking at a final report to be finalised by the end of November for discussion in December. So thank you very much. I appreciate that was a gallop through an awful lot of information, and we're very happy to try and answer questions if you have time now, or happy to be available at any point to discuss individually with the points that we've been flagging. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both for going through that. I think it's useful for members to have that update, because NN to Net Zero is quite a new project, but clearly you've got through a lot of work over a short period of time relative to that. There's just one thing I wanted to point out, just in case it causes any confusion. Obviously, as a council, we have set a date for becoming carbon neutral, which is 2030. and what the dates you've referred to as potential dates are for the wider North Northamptonshire area, which is obviously it's a very large area, hence the difference there. A lot of hands have shot up, so clearly people are interested
Apologies, Chair, just on that last point, we have actually engaged with the council, obviously, on its own carbon management plan, which is emerging, and around those dates, and the leadership role that the council can play is feeding into this. But you're absolutely right, there's two slightly distinct timelines and areas that we're looking at.
Yeah, perfect. So the first hand up was Councillor O'Hara.
Thanks, Chair. Absolutely fabulous presentation. Thank you for it. A few questions, a few comments. In Northamptonshire, just off the M1, we have amazing logistics companies and a new hub being built there. And I think one of them is Clipper, and I believe they've just changed their name, taken on more work. And I think that would be, the companies that could be targeted to do all these solar panels and take the initiative and put Northamptonshire on the map. And I think also, a lot of people are thinking quite rightly about the initiatives we can take, not least in the tertiary industry, and looking at Chester House and our estate and the work we've done there with English Heritage, but also the wider issues of the entertainment and things that people enjoy. And you only have to look at bands like Coldplay that, they're doing a world tour, but they collaborated with BMW to make sure that they produce the batteries that powered the stages at the tour. And for that, BMW were allowed to use some of Coldplay songs to do their advertising, which Coldplay have never done. But they did things like kinetic floors as well, just to show you how to use energy. Got plenty of wind energy out here today. But my question is that with this report and the initiatives that we've got, I just think it's a fantastic opportunity to make this world a better place and to get the industry on board to support us. And also, as a council, we've already started that journey because we've already built some homes that are very energy efficient. Top Dyson's just outside Kettering in Cranford. We've already done, and that can be taken forward. I think it's Norwich that's built the passive houses, council houses, which are absolutely amazing, and actually they create enough energy to pay back into the grid. So I think they're things that we could really look at. The air source heat pumps, I have probably mentioned that a million times at planning meetings, etc. But the air source heat pumps, they're good, but the trouble with them is that they do use energy to actually power the pumps that they use on the outside. Most houses, if you're talking £10,000, £11,000 for an install, a lot of people aren't going to go for them because they don't like the pumps on the outside. And we need to use that initiative to inform people how they actually work. I know they're seen as a reverse aircon units essentially, but it's a way forward, away from getting away from gas. My concern is that I think you're saying you're 20 years away for using technology in terms of looking at the big companies like BP and Shell. I think Shell have withdrawn from the idea of using hydrogen. I don't know whether that's something that they will continue to look at. And I think we need to look to our farmers because you can see how energy efficient they are and how much they reuse the resources. And within Northamptonshire, we've got a prime opportunity to look at our housing, look at our development, look at our infrastructure, because the units that we passed at planning last week, one of some of the units that are going in there, I think it's a company called Top Hat, and they build homes. Basically, they build prefab homes. So I think it's those companies that we should be looking at to get on board, and perhaps. They probably are already thinking of things like this, but I just think, we've got so many companies within Northamptonshire that would absolutely be totally engaged in this. And thank you for bringing it to us. And just really how we then get out there and influence all these companies that we've got, that we're already engaged with because of our planning commitment and our planning policy structure. I think it's just an absolutely fabulous opportunity to take this forward. So thank you for that.
Thank
Chair,
you.
I don't know if there's anything you wanted me to pick up on that. There's obviously, I would say absolutely, and it's really the potential is huge. The challenge is huge as well, but I think it's just a case of cracking on.
Great, thank you. Councillor Dell.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Nick. Thank you, Peter. That was amazing to see all that. I mean, if that's the huge amount of content in the presentation there must be an even bigger amount of work that's gone in behind the scenes, and you've obviously been working really, really hard on this. So thank you. I did have a couple of points that I've picked up on. I was wondering, the digital twin tool sounds amazing, especially for finding the EPC ratings. Being able to prioritise which houses need more insulation. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the mobility hubs, and also solar PV. You mentioned briefly solar PV on logistics car parks. Now, I hear so much from people going, why are there all these warehouses with no solar on the roofs? But solar on the car parks seems like a really, really brilliant idea, and it would be great to see that expanding out. So can you add a little bit of detail to that as well? Mm-hmm. Also, the embodied carbon you mentioned in the planning, obviously a lot of that can be changed through planning policies and for new builds, for warehouses, and enforcing things like EVs. It'd be really good to have that, have an idea of how we can do that as a council, because obviously all new, as Jan just said, the new top hat stuff. They're building things into this that we need to be able to enforce as a council to make new developments more like ideally passive house, but that's a big ask, I know. And also there wasn't a huge amount of detail on the modal shift. So obviously we've got local cycling and walking infrastructure plans that are in place at the moment, well, that are being developed at the moment, but they'll need funding, and also things like free bike schemes, and I guess they would fit in with the mobility hubs as well. And also there's a little bit of a detail, like 20-mile-an-hour limits. Obviously you mentioned transport being a huge amount, like 56% of carbon. So lowering the speeds of cars and vehicles in towns would seem to be an easy thing to do as well, to reduce that carbon. So you mentioned that the final report's due at the end of November. Is there still time for people to feed into this? And how would we do that? Or how would members of the public do that?
Absolutely is a short answer. The website has a form on there for people to drop their ideas into, so nn2nz.co.uk. Front page, there's a get in touch, send us your ideas, got ideas page. So we're happy to take on board anything that comes in. We obviously won't necessarily be able to cover absolutely everything, but it's been a gallop through the year, a lot of ground covered, as you say. I'm just picking up on those points. The last one first, perhaps emissions. We have sort of started to look at how emission zones can impact, whether that's a complete exclusions or reduced speed and so on. That would form part of that review. Absolutely. Mobility hubs, I think, is something we're sort of picking up on some work that the area was already doing. And Ian will be talking more about that as well, but not necessarily now. But picking up from work that was going on previously, looking at how we can have locations where people can, walk or cycle to, and then pick up the next level up of transport to go a longer distance, whether that's a shared EV on demand or picking up public transport at that point. So we've been looking at a trial of those hubs. And there is a study that, as part of this report, there's a bigger report by WSP looking at those, where they might be, what particular initiatives that each individual hub might have, because they may be different in different locations, whether they're rural or urban, and so forth. So there's a bigger study sitting behind that we will be sharing as part of the review. Solar on car parks, absolutely. I mean, we've been banging on about this for a long time, looking at all the car parks around Corby, for example. There's massive storage of car parks. The cost point has been part of the challenge. That point has shifted significantly in cost and in benefit recently, and it's definitely an area that we'll be championing going forward. And to be fair, the logistics industry, back to the first point of the first speaker, first questions, the logistics industry are now, and importantly, the investment houses that sit behind building these sheds are behind the idea of more solar where possible, driven by the fact that it's basically a letting advantage for them when they're trying to get people to occupy the building. So it's risen up the agenda significantly in the last few years. EV, I may have missed a point in the middle of there around EVs, Peter. Are there any other questions that I've missed there? So forgive me, Des. I'll maybe missed the question.
There was stuff around the planning policy as well.
Planning policy. Yes. So, I mean, as I said, as part of my little piece, we are sort of engaging with planners. We're providing support as well with particularly Handwood, for example, in Kettering around the debate that's live now around how they might achieve net zero, and really supporting planners in terms of the information on the options that are available, and finding out the challenges that the developers are facing in commercial terms to deliver these things. So it's a hot debate right now that we're actively engaged with, and transport is a key part of that. How can those buildings and how can even the layouts of those places encourage a transition? I mean, one of the points, just quickly to make, if all we do is transfer every petrol car or diesel car into an EV, then we probably miss the opportunity. So in planning terms, I think how we look at transport, I think when I was talking about lagging thinking, if I may be so bold, one of those areas is definitely transport planning. It's very much designed around the car as opposed to people and places. And identifying better ways to plan those places is a golden opportunity for improvements and reduction in transport dependency.
Perfect. Thank you for those. Councillor Allibone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, firstly, I'd like to congratulate Nick and Peter on a very comprehensive presentation. A lot of facts and figures there and a lot of food for thought. I've just made copious notes. I'll just sort of try and briefly go through some of them from a farming perspective, as you would expect. And we talked early on about e-fuels. It's not a panacea for everything. We've moved from 5 to 10%, certainly in biodiesel. We do end up with problems with our fuel filters. It's hygroscopic, obviously, when you get water in this, whereas normally I would change a fuel filter on one of our big tractors at about 250 hours. I'm having to get to about 80 or 100. I've got blockages in the system and there's a lot of downtime. And you get problems building up with bacteria on tractors that aren't used particularly frequently. So there is a bit of a problem there. The other one I was going to mention is insulation, and that sort of brings me on to my wheat crop this year. I think just under 700 tonnes. The majority of it has gone for insulation. It's gone into the industrial side and not the food side. I've sent a lot up to Manchester for starch extraction, and that goes for packaging, insulation. So that's certainly one thing that we're helping to contribute to. And the rest of my wheat has gone up to Hull. I think it's the Vivergo plant up there. I'm not quite sure. There are 2 up there. And that's gone for bioethanol, which is putting, as I say, up to sort of 10% on the government initiative. Picking up on locally grown food, that came on one of the other facts and figures. We're fortunate here, or I'm fortunate near Wellingborough, in that I've got Weetabix and Whitworths and Haygarts, a lot of local mills producing locally sourced products. Weetabix have a policy anyway of not actually accepting wheat for farther afield than a 40-mile radius. The committee has heard this before, but obviously, you know, we have a solar panels on the roof. We have an 18-kilowatt system, which is as much as our village will support. And I direct drill, and I'm sort of repeating the obvious here because we've all heard this before. But with carbon sequestration and not releasing carbon into the atmosphere, we are saving hundreds of tonnes a year of carbon from being released. So that's another thing that we're doing. There were several mentions about if fertilizer was banned. Well, of course, the organic food market is expensive. It's only just about 1%, just over. And frankly, if we had to ban fertilizers, and I'm not talking about just this country, but globally, we'd need another planet to grow food on, because we already need 50% more food to be produced globally by 2050. And that just isn't going to work, because if I didn't use fertilizer, and it is a hugely expensive product, and of course it's very gas intensive, the gas use in producing it, my yields would drop 50%. So I think you're almost looking then at population control, because I don't know how else you're actually going to do it. Let me just have a look. I think I just about covered most of it. And yes, hydrogen was mentioned towards the end. There are moves with heavy vehicles and plant equipment and tractors. New Holland have already running an experimental hydrogen-powered tractor. I don't have an idea; it's not available, but I don't have an idea on the cost. I do have an idea on the cost of a JCB tracked excavator. A diesel version is 150,000, and a hydrogen version, which is just about to be introduced to the market, is 300,000. So a lot of challenges. So I've got no questions. It's just a question of picking up on some of the challenges that we're facing from my own particular industry, the agricultural one.
Chair, if I may, just quickly on the last point around hydrogen and the fertilizer. I mean, the whole transition on hydrogen is a big challenge because it's really inefficient to transfer electricity to hydrogen generally, and the alternative is to extract it from gas, which means you're essentially using lots of nasty gas unless you capture the carbon. It's really not a great process, but it does have a role to play. And I think fertilizer is one particular area that, in process terms, that it's a relatively small volume of hydrogen you need to be able to offer an alternative form of synthetic fertilizers that can produce from hydrogen. And we're sort of picking up on that as a way, as you say, everybody going organic everywhere is probably not practical. Isn't practical, but finding an alternative way to generate the fertilizer that we do need through hydrogen is definitely a route to be looked at. But the other problems around hydrogen are quite significant, I think, in terms of vehicle. And you just flagged that one of the challenges in the next few years is not going to be the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you for those insights there, Councillor Allabone. Councillor Watt.
We might have lost Kevin. Actually.
We can't hear you, Kevin.
He said he's got a fire alarm which he's had to respond to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. IT. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Peter. Very comprehensive report into the scale of the challenge that we face, not just in Northamptonshire, but in the country. I've got some stuff written down if I can make any sense of what I've put down. I like the ideas about planting trees everywhere, all over the place. I'm so concerned as we could have a two-tier element here. We've got people who can afford the transition. They can put the solar panels on, they can put the battery on. They have off-road parking. And then there's the people who can't. And I'm concerned that they'll be left behind. Their energy costs could be higher. I personally, a few years ago, put solar panels on. I'm looking at putting a battery in. I've got an electric car. I benefit from all those. I've had the money to do those things, although I have had to borrow for it. But I'm hoping that long term that I will reap the benefits of it. But I'm concerned about those people who can't. Especially the off-road charging. We don't want to penalise those people. So whatever they're charging, if they can't charge on next to their house, wherever they do charge, they shouldn't be having to pay a higher rate than those that benefit from having a driveway. And you talk about behavioural change as well there. I don't think people change behaviours. Markets and options give people the ability, they have a better offer and they change their behavior from that. We can tell people as much as possible you want, if you're a vegan, it's really great for the planet. They're not going to do it. So markets and options, a few food companies are coming up with the vegan alternatives. Maybe people will go vegan. They probably won't. They'll probably reduce the amount of meat content in their diet. And I think at the moment it's very successful for energy companies to frame the problem as a people problem. You haven't changed. You haven't gone down the low carbon route. Well, it's because you haven't offered me a cost-effective low carbon route. So it's very successful. It's our carbon footprint, but we have very few options, and the alternatives are cost. And all through the report, you'll totally accept what we've got in there as cost, and it's working out how we can move to a lower carbon footprint across North Northamptonshire by at the lowest cost that we can do, and that's where the central government comes in. Whether it's knocking all the VAT off of solar panels, wind generation, batteries, or giving some kind of tax incentives to put that in. One of the other problems is Western Power, or National Grid as it is now. At the moment you can put your solar on your roof, but you can only export 3.6 kilowatts. I went to a gentleman's house in Stanyon. He's got 5.4 kilowatts on his roof. He can only export 3.6. Fortunately, he had some money and he's putting in a battery. At this point in time, he is off the grid. He's filling his battery and then using it and exporting what he can to the grid. He had the money though. It's important. Microgrids. I'd like to sell my electricity from my solar panels to my next door neighbour. So, but that's energy companies. I have to say that Octus are probably the most advanced company here doing that in the market at the moment. So hopefully they will enable people to do that. On the food side of things, changing behaviours on food, I think it's probably best to start in schools. Get our kids food lessons with seasonal vegetables. Do it in schools. Get them to take it home to their mums and dads. And I'm very pleased that the false profit of renewables H2 hydrogen was mentioned there. It's not hydrogen boilers, and it's not hydrogen cars. It's just that's such a wrong move to go down that way. So, but thank you for all the work you've put into it, and looking forward to the rest of it. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, I don't know if you wanted me to pick up. I'm conscious of time, so maybe I can pick up with Kevin on some of the particular points offline.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful given the time on that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and thank you, Councillor Watt, for the input there. As we've just alluded to, probably have to call time on that item. Clearly, it's a really interesting one as ever. If members have got other questions, then as I think, Nick, you kind of suggested there that you're happy to pick up on those so that people can get the information they want.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Great. So we'll move on to the second item, which is another presentation from Starship on the robots, the little delivery robots, which are fantastic, and I've got a really positive response. I have enjoyed having my shopping delivered in one of those. So I'm going to hand over to ENA Church first, and then we'll get on to handing over to Starship for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. And it's really topical following Nick's presentation of the big picture and some of the kind of challenges, and reflect on one of those challenges is around kind of first mile, last mile delivery. And it looks a really, really difficult challenge, doesn't it? But who would have thought 3 years ago you'd have Starship delivery robots in Higham Ferris and Rushden and Wellingborough? So that's what Starship delivery robots are doing. They're in those 3 towns in the north for the last 3 months. So they launched in July, and it is tackling. Well, it's all kind of win-win in terms of the environmental benefits, but also convenience benefits, particularly for the people who may struggle to get out of the house to do that shopping. So delighted that we've got Lisa Johnson, who's the Director of Government Affairs from Starship, to tell the panel a little bit more about the operation, the technology, and importantly the benefits for Starship, and how technology and it can be kind of commercially viable to do really creative solutions which deliver environmental benefits. So over to Lisa.
Thanks a lot, Ian. It's really great to be here with everybody. So thanks for the invite. And as Ian said, I'm Director of Public Affairs for Starship Technologies. And we have actually one of our biggest deployments globally is in Northamptonshire. And when you take in Northampton as well as Rushden and Ironfairs and Wellingborough. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And this is always where it's rather embarrassing if it goes wrong when you work for a tech company. But let's give it a go. There we go. Are we looking okay? Thanks, fantastic. Yep. I can see some thumbs up. So who are we? Well, as Ian said, if somebody had said to me sort of 2 years ago that autonomous robotic delivery was a thing, I would have actually thought it was a little bit of science fiction. But it's not. So Starship are delivering in multiple countries across the globe, tackling that problem of last mile. Now, what I would just like to do, just to make sure, because if you've not seen the robots in action, it can be a little bit difficult to understand the context of what I'm saying. So just before I move on to anything else, I'm just going to play a short video, if that's all right, which is a day in the life of our robots, just so folk can see them in action, in case you haven't seen them in real life, just so you know what I'm talking about. Oh, apologies. We're back again. There we go. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about how we work in practice. And just to reassure people, that was speeded up. They're not actually traveling that fast on people's pavements. So what do we do? Well, Starship operates in Northamptonshire, Milton Keynes, Cambridge and Bedford, also in Finland, the United States and Germany. And in the UK alone, we've done 1.6 million UK miles at the moment. So whilst we're operating trials in a number of areas, as Ian said, we are actually a commercially viable operation that has made over 3.6 million deliveries worldwide. The problem that we're solving is, as Ian alluded to, last mile delivery is one of the most carbon intensive parts of the supply chain. And the pandemic only hastened trends towards people wanting things now, ordering it online, potentially small, low value baskets of goods. And the question for us all is, how do we ethically and sustainably provide that sort of service? Because the demand doesn't seem to be going away. And so that's where Starship fits in. And in terms of the carbon benefits, well, we take cars off roads. We've been conducting a number of surveys across the areas we operate in the UK, talking to people about what would you do if Starship wasn't there? So one of the reasons our partners like working with us, and our partners are people like companies like Tesco, Co-op. Starship's just the delivery vehicle. We don't have a warehouse full of food and groceries to deliver. So we work with partners such as Tesco and Co-op. People like us because actually there's an element of people like the robots, so they order extra stuff, which obviously works well for local businesses. But But in terms of taking cars off the road, people between 50 and 70% of our customers, depending where you are, say they would have driven to the shop. So that's obviously quite a substantial saving in terms of vehicle mile reduction and also carbon reduction in the local area. As a side point, I know we're talking about carbon reduction, but the other big thing, two big things actually, is that families who are time poor find it a really great support for their well-being. Because if you've got the kids home from school and you've realised you've not got everything you need to make tea, getting the kids back out again and going to the shop, that's not necessarily an easy task to do. So people really like the idea that it's a low stress, low cost way of fixing that problem that crops up in their lives. The other, actually something we were slightly surprised about, because we always knew we were good on this, but we didn't realise the extent to which we're providing a service, is that disabled people are massively overrepresented in our customer base. So between 17% and 25% of people who respond to our surveys say that either they have a disability or someone in their family has a disability. So it's sometimes not even a question of taking cars off the roads, it's that people physically couldn't go out and necessarily go to the supermarket. So that's something we're really proud of, actually. And as I say, it came as a little bit of a surprise that the levels at which we're working with, and we're going to do some more work around that with people in the community. So 50 to 70% of customers would have driven to the supermarket. Now, when you combine the fact that we've taken cars off the road with the fact that our actual operations are zero emission, it means you've got a carbon saving. So I do say our actual operations. So there are a few things I'm going to talk about later about how we can lower our emissions further, because where we are at the moment is our robots, we put them out on a morning, we pick them up on a night, we take them back up to our hub to charge. And obviously there is a carbon element involved in that, because we have a courier that does that, or the team go out in the van and they pick up the robots and they bring them home and put them to bed. But largely, one Starship delivery is using the same energy that you would use to boil water for one cup of tea. And when you put all that together, you've got carbon reduction of vehicle reduction miles of 1.1 million across the UK and 470,000 kilograms of carbon reduction in total. Now, I'll be able to get figures for Northamptonshire. We're currently working on those because we obviously have not been in action for too long in some parts of the patch. So we're just pulling those together now. But it does come with a slight caveat, some of these figures, because it's very difficult to get a really accurate figure, because even if people say they would have driven to the shop, you don't know if they're in an electric car or a hybrid or indeed in a van, or they would have ordered from someone on a van or a bicycle. So we compare this to a standard combustion engine in terms of the carbon reduction targets. So a lower emission future, well, where does Starship want to go in order to further reduce our emissions and our carbon footprint? Well, one of the big things is longer battery life, because the less we have to recharge our robots, the more efficient they are, the lower our emissions, but also greater energy efficiency. And that's in the tech for us. So Starship robots have taken sort of the 8 years in development. It came about because our founder Ati was actually competing in a NASA Centennial Challenge to build a robot to go to Mars and collect samples. And he didn't win that, but thought, well, maybe there are some other applications for this robot that we've built. So our robots are developing constantly over time. When they first started going out in Milton Keynes, they had a robot handler walking behind them, for example, because their hadn't learned how to cross roads autonomously. They've gone from having a robot handler walk behind them to be 99% autonomous. And crossing over 60 million roads and drives in their lifetime now. But greater energy efficiency of the robot combined with the longer battery life obviously means lower emissions for everybody. But one of the things we're really excited about is looking at on-site charging. So if we can find ways to build our robot operation into the smart infrastructure of cities, meaning that there aren't any couriers, meaning that robots don't have to be taken away and put to bed on a night. If they can actually go somewhere close to where they're operating, charge themselves up, it will lower emissions and make the service actually much more efficient for everybody. So we're really excited to be working on that with Northampton, actually. And it will be one of the first places in the world that we've actually managed to do it, if it's something that we can work together on to actually deliver. So there's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour around where we are in terms of carbon reduction. I didn't go too much into a lot of the detail of who we are, because I'm assuming most people know, but I'm more than happy to take any questions around anything to do with the carbon reduction, but also how we work, operate, and the technology as well.
Great, thank you, Lisa, for going through that. I think that's a useful introduction for people who perhaps haven't got them in their areas just yet and haven't seen them out and about. A couple of hands gone up, so Councillor Watt.
Audio again. Okay. Good. Thanks very much, Lisa. This is part of what I was mentioning about the market options. You know, changes. It's an offer to people. It's not going to not everybody's going to use it. It looks great. It does rely on good pavements to. It's obviously not one that's going to go to Mars and trundle over rocks. I'm encouraged by its disabled people and this aspect about time poor. Time poor people are usually rich people. That's the thing. One other thing I was thinking of is it doesn't necessarily need to be supermarkets who use this. It could be local shops. They could hail it. It could go to them. They could pop in some product that somebody else wants in the town, and they could take it to the person who wanted it. Also, perhaps even if I wanted to send some stuff to my mum across town, I could maybe hail it and put whatever it is I wanted to send to her in it, and not make that journey myself, or to somebody. So the expansion options of it, I'm thinking of there. Thank you.
Thank you. And they're robust little things. They get up some uneven surfaces really well, actually. And I have seen people stopping to help them when they think they're really stuck, which is very sweet, actually. Lisa, I didn't know if you wanted to pick up on any bits there or just happy to.
Sure, yeah, just bring me in as needed. I mean, in terms of small businesses, absolutely. In Milton Keynes, we're doing quite a bit of that at the moment. Obviously, small businesses have got different barriers to participate in the scheme because you've got to upload your inventory through the app and you've got to keep the inventory up to date. So that sometimes is the reason why we don't have as many as we would like. But absolutely, there's so much potential in it. We've got some of the older residents in a couple of places we operate, and we've not managed to figure this out yet. But they don't understand why they can't go to the shop and just have the robot take their shopping home for them, because they actually like to go and pick out their shopping, but they just don't want to carry it home. So I think there's some potential there as well. Things around prescriptions, there's huge potential in it for future as we develop. We can get over a few rocks. You know, we are a bit robust. We could because we operate in Tallinn, which is not always straightforward. I think we had to stop short of leaving the robots out in the hurricane in the States, but they they are pretty robust. That they are, as Councillor Pentland said, they can get up curbs, and they're low weight and low speed, but they're kind of 30 kilograms. So it's not something that someone can pick up under their arm and wander away with. And they're quite robust. They can get over a lot of obstacles.
Thank you. Councillor Allabone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Really interesting, actually, Lisa. I have seen these operating outside my granddaughter's school in Hardingstone, Northampton. And I'm always amazed at how they stop for traffic on the roads. I don't know how far I think the fact that interested me most is that an individual delivery used the same amount of energy as boiling the water for a cup of tea, which I found astonishing. Is that when because you've got a short run or a longer run, or have you got that figure by averaging out over the day a number of runs and then dividing it up, and including, of course, the cost of recharging? Because just having one delivery on water for a cup of tea seems quite incredible. I mean, if it's true, then that's amazingly efficient. But I just wondered how you calculated that.
You know what? I'd have to go and ask the people who do that. Who've got smarter brains than I. It is an average over the period. Right. It's not sort of, we don't take one delivery and go, right, that was a cup of tea. So it is an average of multiple deliveries. In terms of range, we go. To be honest, the distance is not limited, because our robots can do about 18 hours on one charge. So it's more that the fact that the wait times. So because we're low speed and we're going to stop and avoid all obstacles, it would take a long time for the robot to go 10 kilometers, possibly longer than people are willing to wait to get their last mile on demand groceries. So we tend to limit to 3 kilometers roughly in the areas that we deliver to. And obviously for us as well, to make it commercially viable, if we spend an hour on one delivery to get things backwards and forwards, and people just want a bottle of milk and a newspaper, you know, how do you make that commercially viable? as a business. But yeah, we are incredibly efficient, and we're constantly striving to make that more efficient because it is the right thing to do in terms of carbon emissions and climate, but also it makes sense for us as a business as well. So we do invest a lot in making that happen.
Thank you very much.
Councillor O'Hara.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question, really. With the growth of logistics and warehousing, etc., and the move away from town centres and perhaps having more home living in town centres and more niche shops rather than the big shops, I think a lot of the shops now are quite happy for you to order online and either pick up in store or deliver. And obviously when you return, it's all automated. If you go to Zara, if you order, because you don't have to pay for delivery, if you order and pick up in store, it's all automated. You press a button and you can't get it. If you don't know the code to be able to get access to that machine, then the shop assistant can't get it. And I think this idea and this concept is fabulous, because I can see that in the future that you'll be hooking up with various companies, various shops, and also delivering their goods. Because at the moment, the likes of the big companies like Amazon are very stretched, and your delivery driver doesn't wait 2 seconds for you to answer that door. You've got to be Superwoman to get to the door in time before they've left and said there's no one in. So I think that this is the way forward, and like you say, it's reducing those carbon emissions and reducing these journeys. So is that something that you're trying to do, to hook up with these big companies and see whether that's something that's viable? I guess in Milton Keynes it's fabulous watching them, but being able to get out of the villages, as you say, 3 kilometres is the range, so that's not going to come to the villages, etc., anytime soon. But I think in other areas in our towns and cities across the country, they are very much a viable option. And whether that's something that shops have contacted you about, or something that your business arm is looking at, it would be interesting to see and to know and see how that evolves, and whether because of that you would then be able to create vehicles that have a bigger capacity and therefore a longer range. Like I said, looking back at what Coldplay did with BMW and getting them to develop a battery that was big enough to power their equipment was phenomenal. And to be able to run vehicles that run on biofuels, as Tim alluded to, we're doing that in farming, we're doing that on our roads, and we still do rely heavily on delivery by massive trucks. And so anything we can do in terms of doing the shorter runs, which is less fuel efficient because of the stop start with what you've developed is amazing. So just a question really as to whether that is something that you're looking at in the future. One imagine so, but it'd be nice to know how that's going to evolve and what the impact of that could be is just amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So as a startup, obviously, we're looking at all different sorts of avenues about where we could go next, because the potential, as you say, is somewhat limitless in terms of this, not just partly because it's a growing segment actually that wasn't there before. So it's fulfilling a new need that's sort of sprung up. So we're looking at all sorts of different things. I mean, for example, when you talk about packages and deliveries, there's always going to be some things that humans are better at doing. But one of the areas that we look at in terms of carbon reduction is if you've got redelivery of packages, actually that's quite a significant carbon expenditure too. If people try to deliver a package, people aren't in, it's got to go back and forth from the depot multiple times. For that one package, you're increasing the carbon footprint of that one delivery. So there's lots of different companies, us and others looking at this across the sector, I think, including in some places logistics hubs. So how would you build a logistics hub as a local authority that things come in and out of? Just on the villages point, we do operate in cities, but also we tend to be in areas where you've got an anchor store that people would just get in their car and pop to. It's just too far for people to kind of walk to, really, especially if they've got the kids and they're just getting the tea on. But they would just pop in the car and go. So it tends to be that sort of distance. It's the 1, 2, 3 kilometres that people are travelling. But we are looking at how you'd operate in some smaller settings. So in Camborne in Cambridgeshire, for example, that's about 10,000 houses. It's quite a discrete development and it's worked really well there. We're now looking about how we could join up a couple of smaller villages. One's got a co-op, one hasn't. How can you link those together and make that viable in terms of providing a service for an area that's actually cut off from a local store because they don't have one near them? So there's lots of potential in it. There's also going to be a question about where regulation goes in the UK to be able to facilitate some of this stuff, because we've been waiting on a transport bill for quite a while now, and obviously things keep changing at the top of government. So we really need a clear steer in terms of where regulation is going to go in this, because I think without that, the entire sector is somewhat at sea, because legislation never precedes technology. Technology happens and legislation comes afterwards. But unless it does, people are still operating in a bit of a grey area, holding off on investing because we're just not sure actually what the landscape's going to look like. So that's also another consideration, I think, not just for us, but for everybody across the sector.
Chair, may I just add that I do know that there are some logistic companies that would love to enhance this, and I think that the thought is, and I don't know whether Lisa you're aware of this, I imagine you are, but kind of building like underground routes that they can deliver. And I think one of the areas that they possibly might look at is Milton Keynes and Northampton, because obviously Milton Keynes has used these for some time now, but kind of building, if you'd like, a mini channel tunnels almost, to be able to facilitate these vehicles in an area so they can travel faster. And I don't know whether that's something that your company is looking at as well, in line with what we can deliver for the logistics companies to help with the smaller deliveries or the stocking up or restocking of items in a more autonomous and quicker, more efficient, cost-efficient manner, and also environmentally friendly. So you get a net zero or a low emission type of thing going on throughout the towns more so than the villages.
That's a really interesting idea, actually. No, I'd not heard about that. That's a really interesting idea. To be honest, I'd be surprised if there's much progress on anything like that until we've had legislation, because everybody's sort of holding off until we know what the actual landscape looks like. But yeah, it's incredibly interesting. I think there's a lot of there's a combination of different modal logistics, because obviously a lot of people are also looking at air drones. So we're on pavements with low speeds, but people are looking at air, they're looking at water, in order to free up, so you take things off roads and lower emissions. So I think this is going to be a sector that is rapidly expanding, but also rapidly changing. It's not just going to be, I think as Ian said in the beginning, if you thought about autonomous robots 3 years ago, you wouldn't think, you think that's not a thing, that can't possibly work. 3 years down the line, we've got hundreds of robots delivering millions of deliveries. What do the next 3 years look like? I think the pace of change is so rapid that anything is possible in terms of.
Thank you. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Lisa. They're really great, these little robots. I remember seeing one in Northampton that was crossing the road and somebody was beeping their horn at it.
It happens, yeah.
So a couple of questions. I've seen things about potential for cities to ban courier vans from their city centres. I presume, as well as e-bikes and courier cargo bikes and things like that, this would also play a part in that. That's more of a comment, but I was wondering, how are the towns chosen to roll out to? So is it dependent on the shop buy-in, or is it infrastructure? I presume there's a lot of things there. I know that, for example, in Kettering, where I am, the co-ops here, there's about 4 or 5 different small co-ops, and they have an EV van for deliveries. So I presume that would potentially limit the rollout here. But are you planning on expanding out to other towns in Northamptonshire?
Absolutely. Well, how it works in Northamptonshire is like Ian rings me every week and says, "Can we have more robots?" That tends to be how it goes. Yeah, we will do. We're a startup. We've been lucky in that Milton Keynes and Northampton have embraced us with open arms and said, "Come to us. We want to try this out. Show us how it goes." And it's been absolutely fantastic to be supported and promoted in that way. So we will be looking to expand, absolutely. And it's worked really well coming out of Milton Keynes. The thing that we found is people who see the robots want the robots. And it's been an almost organic expansion, because people in Northampton have seen the robots in Milton Keynes. So we're like, okay, well, we'll go Northampton. Then people in Wellingborough and Higham and Rushden and other places said, well, we like the robots. Can we have the robots? And the biggest complaint we get is when people on one side of the street have the robot service and people on the other side don't, but they can see the robots and they want to know when we're coming to their area. We actually had a place we had to turn it off because we had an issue, and we were flooded with complaints from one side of the street. So we will be looking to expand. Absolutely. The way we choose places, it's because we don't have our own stock. We're not selling things that Starship own. It's always going to be an arrangement between where councils are happy for us to be. We don't just rock up and decide that we're operating. We do it in partnership with local government, but also where our partners want to be, because obviously they'll have a view as to which stores work best, where they want to be, where they think their infrastructure and training programs are sufficient and ready to go. So it's almost like a tripartite conversation between the council, the partners that Starship work with, and where we think actually geographically is a good place for us to operate, because we can operate in most climates. The robots are so sophisticated now, we can operate anywhere. But we're still not everywhere. So let's pick the best areas while we integrate this technology into local communities, because that's another thing we have to be quite careful of, and it's why expansion doesn't happen overnight. It's a little bit different in Northampton and Milton Keynes because people have seen the robots quite a bit. But if you come to some places up north that we might be looking to expand, people won't have seen the robots. So how do you sensitively engage a community, bring in that technological development and something new without it being scary and it being a positive and people feel included rather than having it imposed upon them? So that's something we're trying really hard on, because I think there is potential for things to go wrong if you just suddenly go, right, this happens here now, without bringing the community along with you. But yeah, the simple answer to the question is, yeah, we will be looking to expand down the line. It's just not something that happens overnight.
Thank you. Councillor Lorman.
Thank you, Harriet. Yeah, look, it's been really good to work with Starship, at least over the past few months, and we're really pleased. I live very close to a co-op and see them beetling past me regularly. It's excellent, and I think we ought to recognise Ian Achurch's work in this as well. He's been really driving a number of these things. But my question, you might not be able to answer this. The co-op are using an awful lot of plastic bags, filling them up and putting stuff in, sometimes not with very much. Are they working with to try and reduce that? I mean, use cornstarch or something. Do you know? You may not know, but it just occurred to me.
Yeah, I believe actually they are environmentally friendly. I don't think it's non-reusable plastic. I can check on that for you. One of the things actually, because we've been speaking about this to different partners, not just a co-op. I was actually at the Centre for Disability Studies the other day in Leeds, speaking to students and doing some tactile demonstrations so people could touch the robots and actually feel them for people who have visual impairments or who are blind. And one of the requests actually was that I had not thought about at all, was that actually if you're in a wheelchair, you do need the bags. Because I've sort of said, well, if there's not a lot of stuff, why do we need a bag? You do actually need them because people can't physically, if they've only got use of one side of their body, or a chair, they need the bags. So, of course, there's a conversation to be had about making sure that's a sustainable substance that we're using for the bags. But I'd not thought about it. And it's one of the good things that we do around this engagement work is that we make sure we're not making mistakes like removing the bags when people need them. So it's a really valid point. It is something that's come up. And all of our suppliers are alive to it as well, because for their customers, they don't want to have loads of plastic bags either.
Yeah, no, it's one of the points I picked up very early, that disabled people and also people recuperating from hospital operations, anything like that, who can't get out, it's a lifeline for them.
And just to go back to the bags, having had the delivery come, the material of them is much like you might get with the biodegradable food waste bags. But it is a point that I had thought about. Councillor Watt.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I was actually wondering what this cost. I did a quick look on the web and I saw some 99 pence mentioned for the delivery, but then that took me on to the plastic waste. I'm wondering if places like Tesco will offer to take back people's plastic bags within the Starship itself, as long as it's a clean, dry bag. They can then dispose of it, because I believe they do collect plastic waste actually at Tesco's, rather than it go into our black bins and go off to landfill. So that would be a good option if they would consider that, or maybe they already do.
Yeah, I can certainly pass that back. I'm not sure if we do that at the moment, because it depends what area you're in as well. The robots are not necessarily assigned to a certain store. So if you're in Milton Keynes, for example, where we've got lots of local suppliers, Costa, Co-op, Tesco, the robots are sort of, they know where to go based on demand. So it's not like Tesco has its own 10 robots. the robots will move between stores to meet demand. But no, it's definitely, you're right. It's something that I will definitely flag to the partners and let them know it's been raised.
Thank you. So I've just seen that I've had some questions emailed from Councillor Buckingham, who I think had some trouble logging into Zoom. And so Councillor Buckingham, who I'm sure is watching, will get answered the questions you emailed earlier. I just hadn't seen them, I'm afraid. She has asked, what is the capacity of a robot?
It's around 3 bags of well-packed shopping, basically.
It's quite a substantial amount, actually, you can get in them. And her second question was, has there been any vandalism towards them?
There's been a little bit, because you always get people, don't you? You know, things do happen. Occasionally our flags get snapped off or someone decides to mess with the robot. But honestly, by and large, people really accept the robots into the community, and because they look so friendly and because they talk as well, they're quite polite and ask people to get out of the way so they can get on with doing their work. They sing a little song every now and again. People tend to leave them alone. Honestly, it's rare that we get acts of serious vandalism. Of course, it can happen because you always get a few people who are going to be like that. But by and large, now the robots are all right.
Great, thank you. So I think that covers off the questions there. Again, that's useful for members, as they say, because they're not everywhere, just so that people can get an insight into them. And I'm sure people will spot them around now when they're out and about. So thank you very much, Lisa, and to Ian for the work you've been doing on that. That does bring us to the end of the items that we've got today. Another really stimulating one, we've been able to dive into those in quite some detail, which is really useful, I think, for members here. The next meeting of the EAP will be next month, should be in your diaries, and we will make sure the items, etc., are confirmed for that. And thank you again to everybody who's inputted into that, officers, speakers and members for today, and have a good rest of the day.